All right, good evening. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to the third presentation in our online weekly conference of End Inflation and the Fed. We're really honored to have a distinguished guest tonight, but before that, if you have any questions at the end, please use the Q&A button. And for those of you that are tuning in or later watching this on video, the Future of Freedom Foundation is a nonprofit educational foundation that advances the principled and compromising case for the libertarian philosophy. We've been in existence since 1989. You can subscribe for free to our FFF Daily, which we have long strived to make the best libertarian daily commentary page on the internet. Also to our monthly journal, Future of Freedom, our YouTube channel, Twitter, and we have a 32 years worth of principled articles on just about every aspect of liberty, as well as a number of videos and conferences on our website. So let's get to our speaker tonight. Just really honored to have Keving Dowd. He hails from Britain, which is why you'll notice that he talks English with a little weird accent. He's a professor of finance and economics at Durham University Business School in England. He's also a partner in Cobden Partners, which is based in London. He holds a BA in economics from the University of Sheffield, an MA in economics from the University of Western Ontario, and a PhD in macroeconomics from the University of Sheffield. He's affiliated with some institutions that y'all will be familiar with, the Cato Institute. He's a senior fellow at the Cobden Center there in England. It's an independent educational charity founded to undertake research into economics and political science. He's affiliated with the Institute for Economic Affairs, that I know many of you are familiar with there in London. Also the Istituto Bruno Leone in Italy, and the Independent Institute, a libertarian institute here in the United States. His main subject of research is private money and free banking, monetary and financial systems that operate without any government intervention and in the absence of any central bank, specifically here in the United States, the Federal Reserve. Reading from Wikipedia, which I would invite you to take a look at his entry in Wikipedia, it's extremely impressive. They say Dowd takes a largely Austrian approach to economics, but one that is heavily influenced by the quantity theory of money and the work of monetarists such as Milton Friedman and David Laidler. He supports laissez-faire and is critical of Keynesian and other interventionist schools of economics. Kevin is the author of 9 books and the editor of 3 others, and I'll just mention 3 that he's the author of. Laissez-faire Banking, published by Routledge, The State and the Monetary System by St. Martin's, and Money in the Market, Essays on Free Banking by Routledge. So without any further ado, Keving Dowd, thank you for joining us, Kevin. It's a big honor for you to be here as participating in our conference. Take it away.
Thank you, Jacob, and the honor is mine. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Bart, also for the invitation to speak tonight. My topic is one that should terrify us all, namely central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. Now, my slides are really too long, and I don't want to do death by PowerPoint. So I'll just dip in and out of them to kind of pull a sort of narrative together. Bart, could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so my starting point is, could the next slide, please? Thank you very much. I want to start with a famous Adam Smith quote, which will be familiar to you all, namely the one about the man of system. The man of system, Smith wrote, is apt to be very wise in his own conceit. He seems to imagine that he can arrange the different members of a great society with as much ease as the hand arranges the different pieces upon a chessboard. Now, many of us over the years have had a lot of fun with this quotation, but I'm afraid the danger is here that it's going to come back and bite us. And I'm talking in particular about plans to introduce CBDCs and to abolish cash. Now, the kind of bottom line here is that there is a power grab in play, which is rapidly sweeping aside what's left of our free society. And most people are oblivious to it. Next slide, please. Now, this agenda has a name, and a very sinister name too, techno-fascism. And let's start with the basics of this. Fascism is the rule of the few. It goes back to at least Plato. Techno-fascism is essentially the extreme concentration of power in the handful of technocrats who exert complete control over the great unwashed. That's the rest of us. So it's a combination of fascism with the power of digital technology to control everything. Now, you'll be familiar with Davos, the Great Reset. That's exactly the context that I'm talking about. Now, techno-fascism involves an alliance of state and big business against the population to destroy their rights and reduce them to techno-serfdom. Next slide, please. Now, the CBDCs are the techno-fascist fantasy. And you might recall this gentleman, Peter Sellers, in Dr. Strangelove, and he has that weird look in his eye. Now, first point, CBDCs have no obvious economic or social benefit to society. That's absolutely categorical. There's a nice quote from a Canadian journalist here, Paz Gomez. He says, among the many races the pandemic has accelerated, none is so pointless as CBDCs. This is true, of course, but it's not pointless to our techno-fascist friends. So basically, imagine the following. The central bank sets up a digital currency, and we don't pay much attention to it. But then step by step, first they compel everybody to use it. Secondly, they prohibit the use of alternative means of payment. And third, they impose restrictions on near substitutes. And then, hey presto, you have a CBDC, which is a tool with almost unlimited powers of control. So what I'm trying to say here is that CBDCs are not harmless, they're a Trojan horse. Next slide, please. So the strategy involved, we're talking, as I say, about the World Economic Forum and these sorts of people, but it's familiar, I think. First, you destroy financial privacy, or at least what's left of it. And secondly, you suppress crypto as one of the alternatives. Third, you abolish cash and push everybody onto a purely digital monetary economy. And so then you have the key ingredients here: no privacy, no cash, no rights. You have total control by those who control the state. Next slide, please. So the tactics, essentially, the power grab is disguised by a lot of techno babble, glossing over the costs and dangers, numb the population with propaganda, and apply Goebbelian truth standards. Okay, so we erode safeguards gradually, and we scare them. And there's a lovely quote from Mencken that you'll all know: the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the population alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. And you have the safety trump freedom ploy. And then we have we need all these tools to deal with the bad guys out there. And then you have the reassure them sort of thing. There's nothing to fear, trust us, that sort of thing. I'm arguing that there's everything to fear. Next slide, please. Well, I mean, among us, I shouldn't really have to dwell on this at all. Should we trust these people to use their power wisely? Well, in case the answer isn't obvious, let me just give you a couple of fun quotes. Milton Friedman says, if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, pretty soon there'd be a shortage of sand. And then there's a one from Britain, Clem Attlee, who was the prime minister who took over from Churchill and instituted the welfare state. So he was no libertarian. But he wasn't a fool either. He said, this island is made of coal and surrounded by fish. Only an organizing genius could produce a shortage of coal and fish at the same time. So a man with a quote like that, what was he doing in the Labour Party? Anyway, never mind. Then I've had a couple of quotes from Tom Sewell. And I think one should never, ever give a talk without at least one Sewell quote. And the best one of these is the most basic question is not what is best, but who should decide what is best. Now, can I just say as an aside, I think the Nobel Prizes handed out this year were a massive, massive disappointment. They should have given it to Sewell, and I'm not the only one who feels this way. Anyway, got that off my chest. Can you give me the next slide, please, Bart? So CBDCs have truly enormous potential. Unfortunately, none of it's for good. Augustin Carstens, the head of the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, kind of notoriously said, CBDCs give the central bank absolute control, and he was not joking. And just to give you an illustration, we have the power of cancellation, the power to cancel anybody's money holdings without notice, without reason, and cancellation can be full, partial, temporary, whatever, and it can be done in an instant. You also have a veto on any expenditure. The central bank can block and punish any expenditures of which it disapproves. This means the means to mete out and collect fines as soon as any infringement is concerned. So we don't need courts anymore for this. We just need these computer algorithms. Now, they have all sorts of use of these CBDCs, and I'll just briefly mention several of them. First off, a number of them. NIRP is negative interest rate policy. This is a very bad thing. Helicopter money, another very bad thing. Pseudo-economic policies. These are very interesting, but also very bad. MMT, modern monetary theory, lockdown, and all sorts of radical new monetary policies, none of which are a force for good. So just skipping through some of these. NIRP, this is a digital version of Silvio Gesel's stamped money idea from 100 years ago. It's a very bad idea. It also rhymes with twerp. Now, basically, economic theory suggests that interest rates should be positive for all sorts of reasons that are familiar to us all, you know, productivity of capital, time value, time preference, and so forth. Now, NIRP, the advocates of NIRP propose it, among other things, to stimulate the economy. But NIRP is a tax on bank deposits, and no tax is ever stimulative. And the danger here is that a radical policy of NIRP could put the economy in a downward spiral in which essentially the financial system, which is predicated on positive interest rates, would unravel. Then next slide, please. Helicopter money. Sorry, next slide, please, Bart. Yeah, thank you. I won't say much about this. The beauty of CBDCs for helicopter money, as a vehicle for helicopter money, is that it can target recipients precisely, though not a single dollar gets wasted on the wrong recipient. There's a certain elegance of that, but it's quite hideous, I have to say. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Then we had pseudo-economic policy. So what is that? Well, my friend Martin Hutchinson, who's the author of the Bears Lair weekly news sheet, which I strongly recommend, he introduced it as the use of economic policy to punish the disfavored. In other words, the use of economic policy to punish people the government doesn't like. So basically, you have a CBDC that's controlled by the government, The CBDC has total control over payments. So the government has the power to control everything. And just to give you a couple of examples, it could go after its enemies, real or imaginary, doesn't matter, and destroy them. It can essentially destroy people's livelihood, their ability to survive, basically. Anyone who got on the wrong side of the authorities, political opponents, whistleblowers, anybody can be subjected to this punishment. And you can imagine where that would go. You know, health fanatics forcing us to follow the latest health fads, or environmental fanatics forcing us to save the planet, religious fanatics who could prevent us from doing immoral things to save our souls, and so forth. It's an awful prospect. Next slide, please. Then we have some examples of modern pseudo-economics. And an example is the Chinese social credit system. So basically, good behavior is rewarded, bad behavior is punished. Now, bad behavior might include bad driving, loitering, smoking where you shouldn't, frivolous purposes, booing the national anthem, whatever. And punishments are many and varied. Could be a slowed internet connection, have your dog taken away, being banned from travel, and potentially much, much worse. So somebody once described this as a futuristic version of Big Brother out of control. Next slide, please. Now, MMT, I won't go into details on this, but essentially it's a form of helicopter money where payments are made to the government. Let's pass over this one. Next slide, yeah. A lockdown tool. Okay. In a future lockdown, CBDCs could ensure that people cannot spend outside of a certain distance from home, cannot spend on unapproved items, cannot spend at unapproved times. For example, they can only spend once a day, and have their spending opportunities restricted if they refuse to get jabbed or double jabbed or whatever. We've seen a lot of this. I'll just give you one quote. We are doing all we can to compel people to get vaccinated. Notice the word compel. The government cannot allow individuals who do not want to get vaccinated to risk people's lives. Other restrictions are also being mooted. Now you can imagine what people, this is actually from the Prime Minister of the Punjab in Pakistan, but you can imagine what these people would do with a CBDC. And if look over the border to what happened with the Canadian truckers, for an example, for a start. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we've got, I won't dwell on this too much. We have the possibility of radically new, innovative monetary policies, all based on the premise that we want greater control over the economy. So, for example, if inflation gets under control, you can just cancel a lot of money. The government prints it, then cancels it, inflation solved. Demand management, which is the traditional sort of, objective of Keynesian macroeconomics, becomes demand control. If they want to boost spending, they can cancel tax money holdings to encourage more spending and less saving, and so forth. And you can imagine where this is all going. It can compel people to buy approved products, like, buy American, buy British, whatever. You can imagine CBDCs offering a perfect tool for central bank climate industrial policy. So firms have accounts with the central bank, they can borrow or lend. The central bank applies a differential rate depending on whether it likes that particular industry or not. And of course, you can imagine similar uses for climate policy. So preferred clients, preferred sectors get preferential treatment. So ESG approved gets better rates, diesel, coal, etc. get penal rates, and so forth. Next slide, please. And we have the war on cash. Now, the war on cash is an alliance of big payments firms and techno-fascists to abolish cash and eliminate a competitor to digital currency. Of course, the advocates of the war on cash ignore all the benefits of cash, especially anonymity. This doesn't mean anything to them. So we have a lot of anti-cash propaganda, cash is on its way out and all this sort of nonsense. Cash is inefficient and so forth. Again, nonsense. You have the bad guys argument that we should abolish cash because bad guys use cash to do bad things with it. Now, this is a really dumb argument. And let me end on a quote here. This is from Jim Grant's review of Rogoff's dreadful book, The Curse of Cash. He says, strip away the technical pretense and what you have is politics. The author wants the government to control your money. It's as simple as that. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so various other problems, all of which are kind of obvious to us. First, we've got the danger of mission creep, that it could be, CBDCs could be introduced for superficially, straightforward, innocuous objectives, and over time, of course, they invent new uses for them, which are a lot less innocuous. So my response, the only response, is CBDCs should be prohibited, period. Okay. Then there's all the other obvious objections. Sometimes there isn't reliable access to internet. You have the vulnerability to cyber crime, cyber hacking, and so forth. And we've seen various examples of that. You have the motto, complex systems fail in complex ways. And the biggest problem here is that a CBDC represents a single point of failure for the whole system. Take it out and the whole system goes down. And a nice example was Hurricane Maria in 2017, when it devastated Puerto Rico. The storm knocked the entire grid out, and the Fed had to fly a plane load of cash in because cash was the only means of exchange that people were accepting. And Ryan McMaken of the Mises Institute has a lovely quote here. He says, in a cashless world, you'd better pray the power never goes out. Next slide, please. I'll give you a couple of case studies. And the first one is superficially innocuous. It's an Australian welfare system called Centrelink. And its objective was essentially to control what welfare recipients, how they could spend their handouts. Essentially, there was a lot of upset over welfare queens living it up at taxpayers' expense. And at one level, you can see that. And so you want to limit how much they can spend on booze, fags. Well, fags is a British word for cigarettes, in case anybody's confused on that. But the problem with Centrelink, as mild as it is, and somewhat paternalistic nonetheless, it concedes the fundamental principle of a social credit system, namely that people should only spend on items approved by the state. Now, this sets a very, very bad precedent. Why restrict the limit to 80% of welfare handouts, and why not apply other restrictions and so forth? So you can see immediately where this is going. Next slide, please. Now, the second case study is a very sinister one. It's the digital yuan. Now, the digital yuan is the Chinese CBDC, which is, as I understand it, currently being rolled out nationwide. So if you think that social credit is bad, can you imagine social credit reinforced by the digital yuan, CBDC? And in this sense, the Chinese are basically the world leaders. And this is nothing they should be proud about. Now, the media attention, at least until recently, on the digital yuan compared it to Bitcoin, but it's nothing like Bitcoin, and it's a major mistake to compare the two. the digital one does not live on a public ledger. It's not a peer-to-peer currency, etc., etc. It's not issued by preset algorithm or any of that. The digital one is digital money designed to give the government total control. It's used to reinforce China's already draconian social credit system. And this is a model that we must avoid at all costs. Next slide, please. I'd just like to give a few quotes. Some of them are quite fun. Some of them are a little bit worrying. This first one is a nice quote by Peter Earle, and he says, digital currency may over time morph into nothing less than weaponizable money. Well, if this is allowed, there's no may about it. It will morph into weaponizable money, and that's how you should see these things. Next quote, please. Every transaction ever made will be visible to the all-seeing government. Now, this is by Dominic Frisby. Now, Dominic Frisby is a rising star over here. He's a libertarian comic. He's a fantastic comedian and a first-class libertarian. And I hope you will pay attention to him. He wrote a famous song, which was nicknamed the Brexit anthem, after the Brexit vote. I can't reveal it. I can't tell you its title because it's basically too rude to repeat in public. But it was very, very funny. He's also recently released an album called Libertarian Love Songs, which is absolutely hilarious. So he's strongly recommended. Then we have John Adams. He talks about dark side applications, and these should not be considered a purely theoretical possibility. They are actually intended by advocates of some of these CBDCs. Oh, can I just make a side point, which I forgot to make earlier on? I know some of the central bankers, at least at the bank. I know people at the Fed, at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. And when it comes to CBDCs and the war on cash, these people are, I have to say, frankly deluded. But they're smart people, they're decent people. They're not the kind of Nazis with the Nazi armband, so you techno-fascists are not all sinister from the outside. But I think this is where we can say that there's a big room of disagreement, but they fail to think through the implications of the policies that they are promoting. And we've seen this over and over again. It's not a new theme. And let me go to the bottom here. There's a nice quote by Kyle Bass. He says, imagine a currency that almost has a mind of its own. It knows your accounts data. It knows your birthday. It knows your social security number. It knows where you live, what you like to buy. And all of this knowledge will be sitting in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And lastly, hilarious quote. This is the motto of the Chinese social credit system. Keeping trust is glorious and breaking trust is disgraceful. That's a hoot. Now, how do we fight back? Next slide, please. First off, recognize the power grab for what it is. Don't believe them. Do your own research. Think for yourself. Then there's the freedom versus safety ploy. Now, we've had this issue since ancient time. Well, my friend Steve Baker, Conservative MP, who's a staunch libertarian and the founder of the Cobden Centre, he says this: don't trade liberty for security ever. You will lose both and deserve neither. Then you've got the bad guys argument, which is always a ploy to expand state control and disguise who the real bad guys are here. We have your best interest at heart. They say it's all progress, nothing to fear. That's a load of absolute nonsense. So we have everything to fear from these things. CBDCs are a creepy fantasy. In terms of an agenda, the reform agenda, first we need to restore financial privacy as a basic human right. we've lost this, so we've almost lost all of it. Secondly, we oppose CBDCs on principle. What the United States and what other countries need is a law banning central banks from these things. They are not at all innocuous. Thirdly, we need to defend cash. And lastly, we need to depoliticize money. We need to abolish central banking, end the Fed. And last slide, please. Okay, in case I haven't made my point as clear as I should have, the benefits to society of a CBDC are zero. The dangers are enormous and incalculable. And these are the 2 points I would ask you to take home as your take-home point. That's all you need to know. The techno issues of CBDCs are of no import whatsoever, except to distract from the real issues at stake. The only issue that matters is the potential of CBDCs to facilitate a reach to total power by our betters, the best in Plato's terms, the fascists, in other words, whose superiority entitles them to rule, at least in their own minds. Even assuming that the best know best, what guarantees do we have that that power would not be abused? Well, none whatsoever. Okay, so the need to depoliticize money has never been more pressing than it is now. And let me end with one lovely quote. CBDCs were concocted in hell by Satan himself. And thank you. I've ended a little bit faster than I thought. Can you give me the last slide, please? I'm sorry, I shot through that. Can you go through the next slide?
Kevin, that is the last slide I have here.
Okay, you don't have this one. The next. Yeah. Okay, then. I have a nice, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But basically, I've shot through rather faster than I imagined, which at least leaves us plenty of time for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, for that excellent presentation. Let me start out with a question. I'm curious as to where we are now with respect to the Federal Reserve and this central bank digital currency that you're talking about. I don't have a good handle on what the situation is here in the United States with respect to what you're talking about.
The Fed's been issuing position papers, which are themselves quite unclear. But I believe a Republican congressman, whose name I can't remember, has proposed a bill basically to prohibit the Fed from issuing any CBDC. So I don't have the details, or at least I can't remember. So that's the thing we need to get behind.
Okay.
There's a lot of very confused papers coming out of all of the central banks. Initially, for example, I had the impression that they were trying to look cool, and like, oh, everybody's interested in Bitcoin, so why don't we get into the game as well? So various weird papers came out over the, let's say, starting around 2014, and they've set out various objectives, but then they failed to deliver on them. So they're always behind their own schedule. Thank God for that. But I think it's only a matter of time before the potential of these things for the kind of objectives they have will become more clear. And therefore, I would point to my earlier argument about don't be reassured, even if they say, oh, it's just technical stuff, don't be reassured. But it is a rather confusing picture.
All right, and let me follow up on that. So are they further along in China with this type of thing?
Absolutely. Given
their omnipotent power.
Yes.
There.
Yes. I mean, they're openly using it to support the digital, the digital one is its a primary objective is to reinforce the controls that they already have with the social credit system, which is itself hugely draconian. So you can imagine when these two control systems come together to merge and reinforce each other, it's going to be truly horrendous in China. Now, as far as I know, no other, well, China is the world leader in this.
And okay, one final question. Is the idea behind it to replace the currency of the country, the Federal Reserve notes, and so forth, the cash business? Is that the ultimate aim?
Yes. So basically, you get rid of cash, put everybody on a digital dollar, and at that point, all you've done is you've got rid of cash, and everything looks the same. But then eventually they'll start innovating and starting to say, whoever controls the government will start saying, well, maybe our political enemies, we should make life difficult for them. And we know that they will do this if they had the means to do it, because the Canadian truckers situation is ample proof that even a democratic government will use these sorts of weapons if they are available. So that's why we need to nip this one in the bud.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you bringing these insights to us, because we all know about the inflationary consequences of what the Fed does in terms of debasement of the currency reflected in higher prices of gasoline and so forth. But
sure,
you've opened up our minds here to the tyrannical aspects of this whole system, the 1984 Orwellian type aspects of it. We've got a couple of questions. Let's go to them. One is, what time frame do you see all of what you discussed would be completely implemented? That's part one of the question.
Well, okay, so in China, they must be getting, they can't be far away from complete implementation. I couldn't tell you exactly how far along they are. It's all an if, though. I mean, if we can kill this thing in the bud, the main thing is to recognize the dangers it poses and kill it. It's not a case of there is a set timetable and this is all going to roll out and be the horror story that I've described. That's up to us whether it becomes that. So that's what I would say. But I'm also kind of bemused by the fact that the central banks are always behind themselves, and partly because their own thinking is quite confused. But it's just a matter of time. We need to get ahead of this one and kill it. It's my main point.
All right.
I'm sorry, that's a very good answer, but.
Well, the second part of the question is can it be stopped? And I guess I would add to that, how? Just through the power of ideas and political activity? And
well,
what do you
can
think?
it be stopped? Yes. I mean, I think as libertarians, we've fought off over history. Many tyrannies have been fought off by people who just said, we can fight it back. That's how the American Revolution started. If we take the attitude, and I think it's a great question, and I think we have to consider, we really do need to consider that question. My personal view is, I'm not going to roll over and die for this one. And that we have to make that decision that it is an important issue and that we want to fight back. That's the message I'm really trying to get across. So everything is possible, however bad it looks. Tyrannies have been overthrown, communism collapsed in the Soviet Union, and so forth. So we have everything to play for, and we have everything to win and everything to lose.
And is there any way that people can protect themselves on a personal basis, like accumulate gold or silver or cash?
Well, yeah, I think all those things are good. Even cash, if it's abolished, might still have a residual value when everything falls down and everybody's digging out their cash from the garden. So I think on a personal level, we need to have these sort of to have contingent monetary assets, as you described.
All right. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
But I was going to say there are things, if I can just look back at my slides, there's a reform agenda that we can put forward, let's say for the Republican Party to take forward, or the Libertarian Party. The key points are restore financial privacy as a human right, to basic libertarian position, oppose CBDCs on principle, so we want to get a law against them, defend cash, depoliticize money and banking, and also to look in our private lives as how we protect ourselves. And admittedly, it's not easy. If this monster kind of gets out of control, then we're in a lot of trouble.
Okay. Next question. Will there be a planned event like a controlled demolition of the monetary system that ushers in this dystopian system?
Well, we can't rule, I don't think any of us can rule that possibility out. And one thing that we know is that that our enemies like to create events so that they can trigger a crisis in which they can never let never let a crisis go to waste. That's such a good idea. Why not create the crisis in the first place? I mean, there's many instances where they've done that. I mean, I think, for example, of the assassination of Kirov in 1934 was the pretext for Stalin to institute his terror. A lot of the COVID stuff was an opportunity exploited by control people to destroy our civil liberties, and they did do a ton of damage. So I would never put it past these people. That doesn't mean, okay, we're touching on conspiracy theory. Some conspiracy theories are right and some conspiracy theories are wrong. And I can point to various ones which have been proven to be right. I mean, we've seen a number of them over the lockdown and COVID. You know, the Chinese, the lab leak hypothesis was a conspiracy theory, which is almost certainly correct, and so forth. So, but not every conspiracy theory is to be taken seriously. We just have to use our judgment about these things. My advice to people is do your own research and find out who you trust. There's lots of good stuff out there for us to find out the experts, the good people in any given area, and then learn from them. I'm sorry, I've wandered off a little bit there.
Okay. The other question is it necessarily the case, this is kind of a long question, is it necessarily the case that a Federal Reserve created digital currency would have to have all of the negative features that some people worry about? We, the people of the United States, could insist that our government issue a completely honest and transparent open source monetary platform for the entire planet to use with no strings or nefarious manipulations attached. Cannot the good of the majority triumph over evil intentions of the few?
I think that's a great question. And the answer is, of course, that's possible. But why would you trust the government to do this? And why would you prefer that the government, let's say some digital currency is the best currency for us? Maybe well, first off, I disagree with that. There is no single currency of any sort that is best for all purposes. There's always different. It's an ecosystem with cash, digital, gold, and other things. But even hypothetically, if there were a single good currency, why would we trust the government to provide it rather than the private sector? And once you get into the conceding government power on the basis of good faith in the people who manage that power, which I always think is unwise, then you're onto the thin end of the wedge argument. And even if it was good originally, would it stay that way? And again, let me go back to the Canadian trucker. Can you imagine what Trudeau would have done with this sort of power if he'd had it? I mean, he did his best. But we are conceding a lot of power to people whom we already have problems, as it were, getting them to behave legally. So personally, although I think it's a great question to start off a discussion, as a libertarian, all my instincts are dead against conceding any power whatsoever to the state. And bear in mind that there's no constitutional mandate for the Federal Reserve in the first place. And look at the power it's accumulated.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that quote. I think it was Jefferson that said something. Let's not hear anything more about trusting the government. Let's bind it down by the
yes, exactly.
By the Constitution. Okay, I think that wraps up all the questions unless one pops up. Oh, wait, no, here's another one. How widespread is this issue? do you know how many other countries are trying to implement it?
That's a great question, and I should be able to give a better answer than I'm going to give you. There are quite a lot of central banks at various stages of considering or implementing them. My impression is it's something like 90, but they're all over the place with different ideas. They're at different stages of development and so forth. To be honest, if it's a moving thing anyway, so let me just make a shameless plug. Nick Anthony at Cato Institute and I are doing a book on CBDCs, and we'll have all this stuff in our book, but it'll be a while yet before we finish it. I'm sorry, that's the best answer I can give to a good question.
Well, I think your emphasis on China is so revealing. I mean, I don't need to know that there's a whole lot of other countries doing it. As soon as I hear the totalitarian communist regime is going to do something, all my antenna go up and say, wait a minute, warning, warning.
Yeah. That's my instinct too.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up our Q&A session. I want to thank you very much, Kevin. These are just excellent insights. I think these are insights that are not generally brought up when people are talking about ending central banking or the destructive nature of the Fed over the decades. The emphasis almost always is just on debasement of the currency and what it does to people at the bottom of the economic ladder. But you've brought us the real Orwellian 1984 tyrannical aspects of central banking. And your point about financial privacy is absolutely right on. I mean, they've just really denigrated the idea of financial privacy. It's like a subset of something, of privacy, which I'm really glad you emphasized that. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you all for thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, hopefully. We've got Phil Magnus. We've had 3 great presentations, as y'all can tell. Phil is a senior research faculty and research and education director at the American Institute for Economic Research, AIER, that I know most of you are familiar with. They do great work, and I'll give a more extensive introduction next week, but I am positive you're going to really enjoy Phil Magnus. So on that note, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you again, Kevin, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you. Good night.